I've been to many dye houses, and it's just it almost looks like a comic book chemical toxic industries with these big metal containers with all kinds of warning signs, and it smells like acid in the air. And dyeing is most of the time done in countries with extreme lax environmental laws because it is such a toxic industry.
Welcome to Detox Your Dome, the podcast, where we empower you with knowledge about the ingredients that make up the products that we use every day. Our goal is to help you become a more informed and conscious consumer. Detox Your Dome, body, home, planet. Welcome back, everyone, to the Detox Your Dome podcast. I am your host, Sophia, and today I'm sitting down with Michel May, founder of Aizome. Today's episode is about something we all interact with every single day, our textiles. The clothes we wear, the sheets we sleep in, the towels we dry off with, these materials sit directly on our skin for hours at a time. Yet modern textiles are the result of a deeply industrialized chemical process. From synthetic dyes to wrinkle-free finishes, antimicrobial treatments, and heavy metals used during manufacturing, fabrics can carry far more than just color and fiber. And the scale of the industry behind them is massive. Textile production is one of the most polluting industries in the world, with dye houses discharging chemicals into waterways and entire communities living alongside the environmental and health consequences of that system. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on how this industry actually works and what it would take to do things differently. Our guest is Michel May, the founder of Aizome, a company that is pioneering a radically different approach to textiles. Aizome produces fabrics dyed with 100% plant-based dyes that are not only color fast, but have been recognized for their therapeutic benefits, even receiving an FDA Class 1 medical device classification and a recommendation from the National Eczema Association. Michel's work challenges a fundamental assumption in the textile industry, that making products less bad is good enough. In this conversation, we are going to unpack the history of dyes, the chemicals hiding in modern fabrics, the realities of textile manufacturing around the world, and what conscious consumerism actually looks like when it comes to clothing and materials. We also get into why recycled synthetics may not be the sustainability solution they're often marketed as, and how little transparency most brands actually have into their own supply chains, and whether true textile recycling is even possible. And of course, we dive deep into the science and philosophy behind Aizome and what it means to build a true alternative to the system we have now. Michel, welcome to the show.
Hello, Sophia. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I would love to start at the very beginning. I would love to know, what was the first moment you realized the textile industry had a serious problem, and how did that lead to you founding Aizome?
Well, I was working actually for a oncology company, and at that time, a bit before that, my mom got very sick with terminal cancer, and she was, having to deal with chemotherapy, and our job was just to make her as comfortable as possible. And at that time, she started reacting to all kinds of things, but she got these really weird black spots on her skin, and we thought it's bad sores. My oncologist that we had told us that if the immune system is compromised, he often sees that people have problems with textiles that they are wearing or sleeping in. And I thought that's super weird. I just couldn't imagine that to be true, but we switched it out, and her sores or these black spot disappeared. And at that time, I was thinking, like, to me, this was just so weird. I'm like, how is something that I've never thought about, and we touch all the time, why does this require an active immune system to defend against something? We all go through different phases in our health. So what's going on here? And it just this realized that, as you said so beautifully in your introduction, textiles have become engineered chemistry, and they're not just like fabrics. And well, I for sure didn't know the first thing about it. I didn't even know what was color made of. What is the ingredient that is used to make color? And that's kind of the rabbit hole that started this whole journey.
When humans started creating textiles and dyeing textiles, I assume we started with natural plants and mineral based dyes, and then we got into synthetic dyes. Can you walk us through how we got to where we are today?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a really, really fascinating story. It is the story of industrialization and really humans moving things from fields into labs, into factories. The first sort of the Perkins is credited to be the first person to have invented synthetic dyes, more as an accident. He was an 18-year-old chemist that every time he made an experiment, he had this residue in his vial and realized, okay, something's going on here. And that happened about 150 years ago, I think exactly 150 years ago. And with that, colors changed from being, or textiles in general, changed from being an agricultural product that was made on fields to something that is made in factories. And that, really, it was an explosive development that just changed the whole face of the world. Suddenly, textiles weren't something that you require, to deal with farmers, in different countries and different places and, local industries, but it could all just be made in factories. And it became, textiles have become a very intense chemical industry.
What are some of the health and environmental implications of the communities that live near these dye houses?
Well, I've been to many dye houses, and it's as I said, it's really when you see them, it's just it almost looks like a, comic book chemical toxic industries with these big you go in these things and then these big metal containers with all kinds of warning signs, and it smells like acid in the air. And the only thing you always think, like, my god, like, how will that be released back into the environment? And it is true that in textile hubs, that the color of the rivers is often the color of the fashion that's right now on vogue in Paris, New York, Tokyo. So these local choices that we make with fashion that we make here when we buy things, somewhere downstream, people paying the price for that. Dyeing is most of the time done in countries with extreme lax environmental laws because it is such a toxic industry. At one point, it was estimated that it's probably, the number is probably wrong, but it gives you a sense of how big the problem is. But it was estimated that 10% of the global drinking water pollution is only from textile dyeing. But we just don't know for sure. But it is truly significant. And it's not just that these rivers just change the color. And, sometimes the biology, there are very famous pictures and videos of like street dogs that have taken the color of that are blue and then taken the color of the denim industry. But these just to get an idea of the toxicity that we're talking about, many colors, you know, let's say of a pair of jeans or it doesn't matter, but like a pair of clothing, if you would have that color in a shot glass and you would drink it, you you probably dead within an hour. But these are not watercolor or like when we imagine color, crayons. Like these are not benign colors. These are really, really intensive. This intensive chemistry.
Wow. So I feel like ingredients like heavy metals, formaldehyde, pesticides, are they intentionally put into these dyes in order to make the dyes brighter or color fast? What's the purpose of all these contaminants that end up in our textiles and in the dyes?
Well, yeah, contaminants or these toxins enter different stages. Maybe on the agricultural stage as pesticides, and maybe as bleaches to prepare fiber for dyeing. Then during the dyeing process, then finishing when to give whatever wrinkle-free, whatever property uh, is needed for the textile, and um, they then end up to a certain degree. They end up in the finished textile, and I think what's important for people to understand that when you react to textiles or when you have concerns about textiles, it's rarely ever the fiber. The fiber is most often people discuss the fiber when it comes to skin and health issues. Despite studies clearly show that most people that react to textiles, it's the treatment. It's not the fiber itself, it's what's done to the fiber. And that's often a total black box because there are multiple companies involved, sometimes in different countries. And they all, this fiber, this textile goes through many different chemical steps, and the company that is selling you the product, the brand, has no idea who these companies are because they buy it just from, have one guy in China or they have one guy in India or in Turkey or somewhere else, a company that they buy from, and they don't have any oversight of the entire chemical process that has happened to the fiber.
That is such an interesting point and one that I want to really dive into. The textile industry is such a global industry, and there are so many brands. There's the large brands that you can buy clothing from, there's small brands, there's local creators, people creating sweatshirts and t shirts. And the supply chain is not always transparent. And even for the people who are selling the clothes at the end of the supply chain. So, talk to us a little bit about what is the transparency between the brand, the end consumer, and the clothing manufacturer.
Well, you said it right. I mean, if you go to the dye house aisle, that's, or I would say, amazing, right? Rarely ever a brand person would go to the dye house. That dye house is somewhere, happens a couple of steps before, most of the time before the tailoring. That depends a bit on the process, but usually how that works is if you ever meet in person, you meet on a textile trade show, or you just meet online and you say, hey, this is the style, this is what we want, and then eventually they send you a sample and they say, great, let's do it. If you ever go to that company, whatever, Turkey, India, China, a couple of other countries, Vietnam, there is also manufacturing obviously in Portugal and then and then a couple of other places. Then you would go also just to the company who's basically selling you the finished product. You wouldn't go downstream to like all the dye houses or the who's ever done the finishing or the spinning, the weaving. You're not going to go to the field where the cotton is from or the linen is from, the hemp is from. And that is rarely the case. So anybody who's doing this, that's already a step more, great, I would say, creates a way of actually being accountable for more that's happening. And the person that let's assume you have a guy, yeah, and he's selling you clothes, then this person would most likely be saying, hey, yeah, our product is according to your local legal standards, and maybe say like, hey, no, we would like to be a bit better, so can we please have some of the organic certifications of fair trade or whatever, and then they say, yeah, okay, here, has the certification, and that's usually it. And that sounds all fine. You would go like, okay, well, what's the problem here? And the problem is when we talk about regulation, like what is the legal regulation on clothing, and why is there, in so many clothing, alarming amounts of lead, carcinogenic dyes? Why are all these things allowed? Well, it is, frankly, there is almost no regulation on textiles. There is a very tiny amount of chemicals that is regulated, a handful, more in Europe and a tiny amount in the US. But there's hundreds, maybe thousands of chemicals that have never properly been evaluated. And you mentioned, before the call, you were talking about dyes. We can get into that specifically because often it's not the problem was what is the chemical when it leaves the factory. Like an azo dye is not toxic in itself when it leaves the factory, but it quickly breaks down into a carcinogen agent, into aromatic amines, and they are strongly cancer causing. And we have to, when we think of toxicology, we have to think not, just how is the product right when you get it from the shop, but how is it after a few wears? And if something is causing cancer, or me, nobody wants to wear it. You definitely want your children to wear it. And that's kind of the problem, with the industry, is this very low regulation. And I'm sure we're going to get into this as well, talking about certifications. Well, are they a solution? Well, they are a step into the right direction, but the current certifications are really just a step better than, what is the legal minimum. They still allow all kinds of synthetics and so on, but they have an exclusion list of like the main baddies, and that makes things better. But it's again the brand, the company that's selling you does not have any. There's everything's outsourced in terms of responsibility, and there's no the checks and balances that you want to see with like any other product in your life, like food, cosmetics, any other thing that has known health consequences. It's just a whole different it's just a whole different level. It's just a lot of people always say this expression. I think it's funny. And like if you're on a textile trade show, people in textile industry will say like, yeah, woo, textiles, it's the Wild West. When I first heard this, it was just so funny, and then I heard many people saying it, and it's truly the Wild West. Like the things that are allowed in textiles is just it's just crazy that this is 2026 and we still do this kind of stuff.
Wow. So, is there a place in the world that is there a country whose regulation is considered the gold standard or who is really at the forefront of trying to enact laws that bring more regulation and transparency into this whole supply chain?
Well, usually Americans say, "Oh, in Europe it's better," and it's true, it is slightly better, but we're talking about, I think, 2 dozen regulated chemicals, while in the US, I think it's three, four, or five, something like that. But there is roughly 10,000 different chemicals used in the industry. And since this is happening, in labs, often under IP protection, the regulators don't even know what chemicals to look for to regulate. So when you're talking about the gold standard, then I would say no, there's no country like this because the regulation is very slow, obviously, and it's partly also because toxicology is not an easy field to study what is toxic and when is it toxic. Our understanding evolves here as well. Well, that we can take that as well as an example. So, like these things have been used for a very long time, but not to poison people, but because people said, "Oh, it's a great material," and to understand toxicology took time. Sometimes hundreds of years to realize, okay, painters are going crazy because of the lead, not because painters are crazy. Or hat makers, right? The crazy hat maker. They used, I think they used tin or lead as well. So they went insane, and people go like, "Yeah, hat makers are crazy." But why are they crazy? Well, because of the material, like their brain was rotting. So we still have this, like in Alice in Wonderland, the crazy hat maker. But that was a thing for a really long time, and we also have a lot of diseases and a lot of autoimmune problems right now that we don't really understand the cause. And there are, there's evidence, there are things that are happening that really requires our urgent attention to go like, okay, something is going on with the population where we have certain diseases. Where could that be coming from? And we are looking everywhere, and people like me, crazy people in the textile industry go like, what, you don't need to look like just look what's on your body. Like what is the material? Well, we don't know. Well, that's the issue. We often don't know. And if we go into these factories, and as I said, if you look at like a dye or what is that dye? Well, yeah, if you were to drink a glass of that, like you would get pretty sick. And yeah, so I think it's partly shocking, but it's also fascinating that um, we are living with that, and it just takes time for toxicology and science to catch up on these things.
Microplastics and PFAs have been detected in our water systems, our tap water, our fresh water, even our ocean. I'm always trying to find ways to mitigate plastic in my life, especially in the controlled environment of my home. One actionable way I found to do that is to use filters that are tested to significantly reduce PFAs, microplastics, and other contaminants from my water. And not just my drinking water, but also my shower water. I specifically chose the Weddell Water Shower Duo because it's the first shower filter that is NSF certified for chlorine and independently lab verified to reduce 99 99% of PFAs and particulates. The other shower filters I looked at really just focused on chlorine and general contaminants, which is amazing. But I did end up choosing the Wet'll Water shower filter because it had that added benefit of mitigating PFAs and particulates, including microplastics. I also liked that it was truly just a filter. I didn't have to replace my entire shower head. I personally love my shower head and I didn't want to have to change the entire thing. The install took about 10 minutes. It was super easy and it looks really nice in my shower. Wet'll Water's shower filter is also dermatologist approved and has been clinically tested to improve skin hydration and scalp health, which is huge if you deal with dryness, irritation, or dull hair. Because you are a listener of this podcast, you can get 10% off your next purchase from Wet'll Water by using code DetoxYourDome. That includes a Wet'll Water shower filter and all replacement filters in the future. Use code DetoxYourDome for 10% off any order from Wet'll Water. So you touched on something earlier that I would like to go back to, and that's there's really two separate issues here. There is the fabric itself. So is it a natural fiber? Is it cotton or linen? Is it a synthetic fiber like polyester or nylon? And then there are the dyes used to color it. So, and I know your expertise really lies on the dyes, and that's kind of what we want to dive into here. So something that I often recommend on my platform is, go for natural fibers where you can, cotton, linen, wool, cashmere. But you had mentioned that you can still dye those natural fibers with synthetic dyes. So does that ruin the integrity of the piece of clothing? What is that process like, and what does it do to textiles when you start applying synthetic dyes to natural fibers?
Yeah, so very basically, most textiles are fiber and some kind of treatment, some kind of color. And you're right. I would, I wear personally. I only wear cotton and maybe hemp, and I have clothing that is synthetically dyed. I try most of it is plant dyed. There's just not a lot of choices, obviously. But these are just, I love them, and these are what I would like to wear on my skin most of the time is a natural fiber with a natural dye. They're obviously polyester is right now really a focus. A lot of customers are now like going crazy and realizing, hey, I just wear plastic all the time. And plastic really, it's a whole different story how the petroleum industry just realized, well, textiles is a great new market to open. And in the last 20 years, we've seen an amazing swap of the fibers on your body. In 2000, it was still 80% of cotton, so 80% of textiles were made from cotton. So most in the 90s, most of us, most of the time, were wearing cotton. And now cotton is just like 20% and 80% is actually now polyester and other synthetics. So most people's wardrobe is just plastic. It's just plastic bags. And there
Wow.
is obviously a point here to say, so what if you take a cotton or linen and you dye it synthetically? Well, synthetic dyes are from the original source almost the same, very similar to plastics. It's a petrochemical-based agent that plastic, while plastic binds to itself, so plastic molecules bind to each other so that you can shape them into all kinds of things, and it's extremely convenient. You can make all kinds of materials just from the same source. And color, synthetic dye, binds to something else. So they bind to all kinds of chemicals or to the fiber, and then they stick on that, hopefully forever. But that's the problem then with the environmental aspect, because once these synthetic dyes have bounded to a fiber, it basically becomes non-biodegradable. It becomes just like a piece of plastic that doesn't break down again. If that's washed into the environment, a fiber from a synthetically dyed piece of clothing, in waterways, there's no biology that can break that down. There's no biology that recognizes what that is. So it's just stored in the oceans, in the land, in the air, or even in our lungs, in our bodies. There's no way that this can be broken down again, and that's in some way, compromises, as you said, the beautiful natural origin. And here the issue is, and that people who are listening to this, I consider you curious nerds. So the curious nerd aspect that's so interesting here is like, Well, if that's true, why isn't that on the label? Why is that? Why is it not on a textile label? Why does it only say the fiber? And here it's super interesting to realize that the label is never meant as an ingredient label. The textile label that you have on your t-shirt, if people look and go like, okay, this is cotton polyester blend. Blah, blah. This is not meant for you to be an informed consumer. This is a trade label. This is meant for the customs officer to check, India, polyester, customs rate is whatever, 7%, or depending
Wow.
maybe what. So,
That is
so the,
fascinating. It's something I've never heard before. So, as a conscious consumer, how can you ensure, like you said, you like to wear when you can natural fibers and naturally dyed clothing? How can a conscious consumer figure out that their clothing is both natural fiber and naturally dyed?
well, you can be I think we have to relax. If we live in this 2026, it's almost impossible to just get all the toxins away from your body. Like it's not possible. You know, the air we breathe, the water we drink, it's everywhere. But you can reduce it by a lot. And I think one clear thing that you can do, and it's the most important thing, and it's the least it's the least business thing that I can possibly say. And I think it's part of the issue why it's difficult to for like companies to go out with that message. But you just have to buy less things, but buy better stuff. The
Right.
overconsumption that everything needs to be cheap, available right away, and disposable, that you don't have to worry about if it's broken. That is a large part of the problem. That is plastic is just so cheap, and your synthetic clothing that has been marketed to you as performance, blah blah blah, something that will cost you $100, it costs cents to make. It's not quality. It's not a quality ingredient, and it will never biodegrade. And while you wear it, it sheds fiber, and you absorb some of these chemicals that irritate your skin. So buy less. That's number one. Number two is whatever you buy, wash it first. That's a very easy thing to do, and people often don't think it has any impact. But most of the chemicals that wash out, or that will ever wash out in the first couple of times you're washing them, roughly 50%. So it makes a huge difference. If you have sensitive skin, if you have multiple chemical sensitivity, if you just have any other health concerns, was it like I've met like I'm not allowed to say who it was, but I've met a professor who interviewed the CTO of a big sports brand, and the CTO said he would never wear anything from his own company that he hasn't washed 3 times. So that's very very important. But um, the third thing, and that's I think the important stuff that we have to I've just pushed this narrative and pushed this conversation is ask brands that you like, what do you do to ensure that the product you're selling doesn't cause any problem to the people who are wearing it. And if they just quote legal standards or just simply say this certification and don't take toxicity seriously, that's I'd say already a red flag. Companies have to be responsible, have to feel responsible that you are safe wearing the product.
So that brings me to thinking about these certifications that can sort of do this validation and certificate of trust for consumers and for brands that they do care about the humans that are wearing their products and the safety and the quality of the things that they're creating. So, talk to us about certifications like the GOTS certification, OEKO-TEX. What do these really mean? Are they important to look for? And is there a certification for safe and natural dyes?
With most certifications, I think it's great to have this being a step into the right direction. The legal minimums, as I said, are very, very low. Right? There's almost no regulation, and even that little regulation that we have is not enforced. What does that mean? Not enforced? It means if there's tons of TV programs that do that. They take textiles, they send it to a lab, and they say like, "Wow, this has 100 times the legal minimum for lead, children's bag." And then they call the company, and the company said, "Oh, we are sorry. We talked with the manufacturer, and sorry about it. We don't know how that happened." There's no punishment for this. There's no enforcement. The FTC in the US or the European Union, whatever consumer agency is responsible, they're not going to come and say like, okay, we're going to raid your office. How could that happen? Like, there's no enforcement. Um, Labels, if they say it's 100% cotton and it's only 50% cotton, and again somebody goes to a lab, finds out, and writes to the company, that's not punishable by law. There's no fine for a company to mislabel a product. I think at most it would be a tax issue that they would say, "Hey, you sneak this through customs as that A, but it's actually B." So again, there's no consumer protection. And by the way, there are studies that show up to 30% of labels in textiles are not correct or incorrectly quoting the fiber content. I think everybody has had this, that they touch something like, it says 100% cotton. I think it feels like something different. You're probably right. Like that's
Wow.
an issue. So
Wow.
in this kind of Wild West, anybody's coming in and saying, "Hey, guys, let's agree to some standards and some rules here." I think
Mhm.
it's important that we start having. Um, I'm just thinking if I can play with this metaphor. If we have some sheriffs, if we've just some jurisdictions where you have some kind of like standards that people can agree on. And obviously, at the speed that textiles are made, these certifications also help because, as I said, if we are a big brand and we want to have a new bag or whatever, and then we find somebody in a country on the other side of the world, and we don't know how it's made, and they said, "Oh, it's this OEKO-TEX or GOTS." So, okay, great. We have some kind of standard that's above zero, basically. So they are helpful. And I want to be very clear to say this, that these certifications are a great thing to look for. And you will get something better than what's out there for sure. But are they to be celebrated as the best we can do? And are they celebrated as a goal? I think clearly no. Like this is important to not just be like, okay, this problem is solved. And that on one hand, I think is kind of to some people is an exhausting piece of news because they go, oh God, no, something else I have to worry about. Can't there just be an easy fix? And that's just easy. It's just important to understand a GOTS or OEKO-TEX. They're both like me, Germans who like to certify and regulate things. That's in our nature. So they're companies with an intention to earn money. So they need to find a standard that is still meaningful, but not out of this universe, so that companies they don't have a customer base. And with that, they obviously, I hope, have the intention to raise the standard step by step, raise the industry. But it's just important to understand that if you wanted to certify a bicycle with GTS, there's probably a way that you could do that. Like there's all kinds of, like saying if you use polyester, then you can't use this. You shouldn't use this polyester. And if you want to use, a metal zipper, then there's like frameworks for every kind of synthetic material. So when it has a GOTS, which stands for Global Organic Textile Standard, it still can contain plastics, synthetics, all kinds of materials, but just a step better than what is legally allowed. And OEKO-TEX tests on a final product for um, for known toxins, but they don't have it's just a couple that they test for. I think um, couple hundred, I think two, 300, maybe more that they test for, but it's not all possible synthetic. So both of them are a step better than what's the legal minimum. But important is for this industry, for this conversation, this is not the best that we can do. They should, in my opinion, this should be the legal minimum. Like this should be the baseline. I mean, the baseline that nothing's toxic in your product. That should be the baseline for the product to be allowed to sell, not for it to be like, oh, this is very, hmm, this is very special. You know what? It reminds me of. I live with my family in Thailand, and there's still sometimes people. I see signs that say clean food. I'm like, that's I don't. When you have to say clean food, that makes me think like, what's the standard here? Like, why does this say
Right.
clean food?
People ask me all the time how to make non toxic living easier. And one of my biggest tips is this: find a brand that you trust and love so much that you'd feel good using anything they make. For me, one of those brands is Primely Pure. I love that I don't have to overthink every single swap with them. I can just choose what fits my routine and know that the formulas are intentionally crafted with ingredients like regeneratively farmed tallow, organic botanicals, and antioxidant rich plant oils. And if you've been here for a while, you already know that I'm a Blue Tansy girl through and through. Their Blue Tansy line is my happy place. Their deodorant, the soothing face mask, and now their new body butter all feel like a calming ritual, not just another product. If you've been wanting an easy entry point into non-toxic body care, starting with a brand you truly trust, like Primely Pure, takes so much of the stress out of it. I love working with Primely Pure because I really just believe in the quality and performance of their products and trust them not only for myself, but as a recommendation for the Detox Your Dome community. You can get 10% off any purchase from Primely Pure with my code DetoxYourDome. That is 10% off with Detox Your Dome, spelled DetoxYourdome. Absolutely. So speaking of what should be the standard and what should be the gold standard, talk to us a little bit about Aizome. You developed a way to make 100% plant based dyes that are actually color fast. So tell us a little bit about your development process and what this 100% plant based dye is and why it's better.
So I just wanted to say thank you for giving me the opportunity, and just to go back and travel back in time when this happened with my mother. I just, I was working in a company that does very advanced cancer treatments for like very late stage cancer, mostly brain tumors. And I was just thinking, oh my God, like we have so many amazing people that work on like late stage treatments. Well, why aren't my mother is already, she's so sick that every treatment was just a short, short extension of her lifespan. Why 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 aren't we doing more to just stay healthy? I mean, we should think of a health span rather than a lifespan. And I still believe that there is the economic incentives are more on treatment rather than prevention. But I felt, just with my at that time really budding understanding of textiles, I'm like, there's clearly so many sources here that will compromise your health. And there's tons of studies that show maybe does that, maybe does that, maybe developmental issues, maybe endocrine disruptors, and we can also talk about the very shocking and interesting case with these airline attendants in the US, where we airline attendants got uniforms, 50,000 I think got uniforms at the same time, and then suddenly certain disease patterns spring up, and nothing changed in their life other than getting, I mean, nothing changed in all of their lives at the same time other than the uniforms. And how this case then basically more or less ended with the company just followed all the laws when they bought the uniforms. Duh. So that's what the problem maybe is. So I think this is a fascinating for me. It was just fascinating to realize, okay, there's something really going on here, and at the same time, if I look for clean clothes, I see so many companies, and I was like, you all just mentioned saying clean cotton, clean this, blah, blah. Who's what's the second ingredient, the dye? Why is nobody talking about the dye? And then maybe sometimes you see people now talking about azo dyes, which okay, great. There's one thing that you're doing, but there's still more. Like it just felt like an incomplete picture that was sold to me as like, oh, this is great. Look, this is great. And I think You mentioned the phrase before, we should not mistake less bad as good. That's basically what greenwashing does. They say, like, look, you use 10% less toxins. Okay, we can celebrate this as an amazing achievement. And so less bad is still bad, right? It's not a solution to the problem. And the system to make it a little bit less toxic does not change the system. So we really have to rethink clothing, actually for all kinds of consumer products, we have to rethink them human centered, focused on biology. Is that product good for the person that is using a product? And when you do that, you realize, hey, you have to just totally change how we are making textiles. The brand that is selling you the textiles needs to have responsibility for everything that goes into the clothes. We can go back thinking about food. A chef should be responsible. The whole meal doesn't. There's nothing in it that's poisonous. They can't just say, "Oh, I just got the ingredients. I don't care where they come from." So, and in that sense, to me, the big thing seemed to be dyes, because I was looking at all these companies that were celebrated as nature's favorite, blah blah blah, and the healthiest clothing on the planet, and the dye was never mentioned. And I understand now why they don't mention it, because most people have never heard about it and don't think about it. So why, wake somebody up, why wake up a sleeping dog? And with that, I think I felt like, okay, there's something interesting about dyes, particularly dyes, because maybe I mentioned it before, but I lived for a very long time in Japan, and at that time I was really interested in like traditional craftsmanship, and I spent a lot of time with like these indigo dyers, like Aizome dyers. That's where the name comes from, with Aizome dyers. And there was one that I got really good friends with and spent a lot of time with him. We still work with him and sell his art on our shop. And he said, like, look, there are all these old woodblock prints from samurais. And he said, what do you notice? What do they have under their armor? And it's like a fighting scene with like arrows and blah blah. Blah. And I said, like, yeah, they all had. You could all see a blue shirt kind of peeking out. He said, the samurais always wore indigo shirts under their armor because they saw when samurais get wounded, the wounds tend to heal faster when they're wearing an indigo t-shirt. And then I was like, okay, if indigo is an antibacterial or whatever wound healing agent that somehow does that, and we as humanity replaced a beneficial thing that we always have on our skin with something that's bad for us, I'm like that would be the most stupid thing. Would that be qualified to one of the most stupid things that we as humanity has done? And that doesn't even think yet about the whole environmental aspect, the CO2, and all the other things we can talk about. And I got really fascinated with the science of it. And in the beginning, we actually just made a crowdfunding video. We put it on Indiegogo. We said, like, hey, wouldn't it be cool to have like bed sheets plant dyed like it was in the old days? And we quickly had my wife and me. We did this in our apartment, after work, and then we suddenly had I think $27,000 in orders from like countries as far as Fiji, Saudi Arabia, Tanzania, Thailand, in the US, obviously. We're like, oh my God, now we have to create a company. What, how do you create a company? And and then we were like basically shipping for 2 years, and we just realized, oh God, everybody's bed size is different. There was also something Wikipedia article bed sizing. I'm like, oh, we should have looked this up before. And it's just though at that time we got like, okay, let's try to understand dye, like indigo dye better. And we did a lot of testing with the dyes, and we've done now a couple of research cooperations with researchers from in the UK, from University of Cambridge, on the wound healing properties of indigo. Does it really help wounds to heal? Super fascinating. It's a paper we published. And the answer is yes. Um, and we are doing now a cooperation with Upstate Medical University in New York, a real medical trial to understand the mechanism. How does that work? Because these properties don't wash out; they stay in the textile. So you actually get an antimicrobial agent that outperforms synthetics like silver, and it doesn't wash out. So to not wash out, you need a bit of a secret sauce. We use an ultrasonication process, which is sound waves that molecularly bind color and fiber. Um, and that allows us to, we don't want to introduce any chemistry and binder chemistry that um, adulters, the purity of the product. So that's our IP. That's a patent that we've developed and that we're using on our products. And so that's basically where we came from, and that's sort of what the base of Izoma is. And to really see this as a medical product, but we need, like, the FDA medical device regulation is much stricter. So we voluntarily um, register all our products with the FDA. So that means really strict traceability of our product, strict understanding of the ingredients in our product, because that's what we do anyway. So our products are within this FDA Class 1 device category. And we basically develop products that, with really sincerity of like, this is the best that we can possibly do to make sure this is good for your health. And it has also these antimicrobial properties. It's not marketing, it's actually a better product that does what we are saying it does.
Wow, absolutely fascinating. Can you explain to us the distinction between plant based and 100% plant based? I feel like that is important. And I think often as consumers, we see plant based dyes, but that doesn't always ensure 100% plant based,
Yeah,
correct?
I love, yes, I love that you're asking this question because now I can rant. So I think and I believe that the word plant-based is marketing. And whenever I'm using any AI, it always changes what I say. When I say plant dye, it changes to plant-based dye. But plant-based is a marketing term. I feel because plant-based means what the basis is plants, but it leaves the door open for what else is in there. And I've had this revelation on a textile trade show where I was talking with these companies and we have plant-based dyes. It was like, how much of your dye is plants? And then she was like, oh, wait, and to call somebody, and then she said, at least 10%. And it was like, what if there's 10% plants, then what is the rest? Like, so I think plant-based is a marketing term, and plant dyes is an accurate chemical description of what is in your in your dye and what isn't. So we use only plant dyes, and that's the starting point of why we always work. It's a plant dye, and we then don't use petrochemical binders or whatever else we have to do in order to get this product color fast. And so I think plant dyes is the accurate term, and plant based is sort of a bit wishy washy.
I love that clarification and it's so important. And it's why I'm in this space because I come from a marketing background and I have seen so many times the nuances of language and improperly educating consumers. And I feel like it's so important to know where those distinctions lie. So you touched on it a little bit how your products are FDA class 1 medical devices and recommended by the National Eczema Association. What was that process like and what does it mean for people with sensitive skin or skin conditions like eczema?
So we started in the beginning, our main customer base was just people with sensitive skin like eczema. That's millions of people. And the still one of our happiest customer base are people with extreme sensitive skin and allergies, because to them it's like they feel the difference. Like, it's not marketing blah blah, and then they buy it and they don't really know they don't really feel what the difference is. So I still think, and it makes me the happiest when people actually have real benefits, and with some of these issues, that people who said, well, I haven't slept for a really long time, I haven't slept properly, and then when they say that product actually helps me, that I can sleep again. So that is fantastic. So naturally we went to these big associations like National Eczema Association and said like, hey, this is something that your custom or your people within your network will really like. And they had this national eczema association seal of acceptance, which was basically a accreditation for innovations that improve the quality of life for people with sensitive skin. And I think we were the first textile that they ever had. And I do think there was a few other words. Unfortunately, a few, I'm sure 1, 2 years ago, they stopped doing having that seal for textiles. And what they said, I called them, and what they said is always so complicated. How do we know how do we actually deal with this? And I was like, that's exactly why you see this so important. But they were like not sure how to anyway do that, and so they just basically now excluded textiles, so textiles can't get the seal anymore. And then at that time, though, we already were with the FDA, which to me anyway is no discredit to the NEA, but that's sort of a step higher, and it's something that has really authority. And we have a lawyer in our team who at that time just basically kept writing to the FDA and saying, hey, why do you not have category for textiles? There are tens of millions of Americans with sensitive skin who need to know what is in their product. So there should be a category for this. So we basically opened this category and just register our products in there with a specific intent for people that want to have that purity in their product to be able to know that. And what it what it requires from us was a really a deep understanding of what actually is in our product, what materials we have, very strict traceability, and consumers can know that if they buy from us, that our products are made with the same strict standard as a medical device.
Amazing. So, talk to us a little bit about your product line. You make bedding, bed sheets, some clothing. Do you think you will expand further into clothing?
Yeah. Great question. So we started with bed sheets because I love sleeping, number one. And number two, I think if you want to detox your wardrobe, it's very difficult where to even start. But this textile, you use a third of your life, and it's more important for your health than any other thing that you own is your bed. So having your bed being a clean space that you love being in, and you get up in the morning and you're well rested, that will change your life. So absolutely, I thought bed sheets great thing to start with. And we've have resisted the urge to take venture capital or to take out large loans. We've always been, fortunate, lucky enough to find ways to, finance the growth of our company ourselves without outside investment, which, I have to understand for anybody who's not been in a company that's selling actual things like inventory is really expensive to build up inventory. And for us, it's even more expensive because we not just build inventory, inventory finished products. Our inventory is finished products, it's fiber, it's fabric rolls. We need to own all these materials in order to grow because we can't just call a guy in China and say, make us an extra 100 sets. That doesn't work like this. So it was an expensive, but it continues to be expensive to grow. But we are super fortunate because we started as a crowdfunding. We always kept this community spirit. We developed basically with hundreds of people together that, in some way like you as well, some have podcasts, some have, influencers, content creators, some are just like super passionate customers who give us lots of feedback on our products, review things, and, help us to pre-finance new production. So we just started a towel and we got enough pre-orders so that we have the money now to produce that and then sell it in June, July. And with that community spirit, and it sometimes, I even feel like we're almost pressured to people like, come on, do like socks, underwear, like all of that, t-shirts. And we're like, okay,
Yes.
okay, well, but we, with that community drive, we can, expand into other product categories as our community wants. And we don't have that, this wonderful, dangerous poison of VC money that you get, and then suddenly you have a lot of money and you do a lot of things, but you maybe lose touch with the actual community. So we don't have that. So we actually are really community driven in what we do.
I love that so much. And you can feel it in everything you create and the quality of your products. And you've just created such a wonderful company that is truly setting the gold standard for textiles and dyes. So, I have one last question for you. And what do you think the path forward looks like for the textile industry? And are you optimistic about it?
I think I think being optimistic is a better way to live your life. Um, and things look really screwed up um, in the world right now, but I think being optimistic despite everything is the way forward. There are really great, thinkers and people and the conversations that are happening. I mentioned a few times today this idea of less bad is not good. That's a German professor, philosopher called Michael Braungart, who is the founder of this cradle to cradle movement, who basically says when we make products, we got to think how they come from our soil, from our earth, and how they behave as a product to the people who are using it and how they return. And there are, I think thousands of companies that he's working with that are going into this framework, into this conceptual framework. And I feel we are very much, aligned with that. Like, things have to come from the soil without causing harm, and all our products can easily be buried in your garden, and you can plant your tomatoes on top of it. It's just material from the soil that can just return to the earth, to the earth. So that's really, really growing. And within that, lose, so I would say lose community, but within this school of thinking, I believe, and many others believe, the way we win is not by telling you that everything will kill you and make you sick, but just make our damn products better than anybody else. And I am convinced that we offer these ridiculous return policies. Like, you can sleep in our bed 365 days and then send it back if you don't like it. And then we offer lifetime or 10-year manufacturing warranty because we make our products so damn good that it won't fall apart. And we have almost no returns because anybody who's sleeping in this after they've paid, hundreds of dollars for bed sheets that they could have gotten something for $20. But once you sleep in this, you go like, this, I don't want to sleep in anything else ever in my life. And that's how you win. And that's, I think, there is a global consciousness right now. We all, I think, can agree that there are clearly issues with overconsumption. There are clearly issues with how capitalism right now is working and makes people overconsume things, and how which rewards companies who are not truthful, and looting the planet and so on. These issues are recognized by many people. We inching our way forward, and I think this school of thinking, this thinking about making things, consuming things, is something that will prevail because people want to do better. And greenwashing is, for me, so frustrating because it preys on these good intentions and it tires people. And people, don't be tired. Try. We keep trying, and we will find our way as humanity.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. One, for being here, and two, for making products that are not just less bad, but are truly actually good, and for setting a new higher standard for our textiles. I have learned so much in this conversation, and I'm so glad we got to chat. And I know everyone listening has learned so much from this.
Well, thank you so much for what you're doing, because it's not just textile that you're doing. I think that this like philosophy of doing better is, and making the world a less toxic and a healthier place is something that you're doing so much with your work. And I really appreciate that you had me on, and I really appreciate all the things that you're doing. And I'll be happy to recommend people who follow us to check out what you're doing, because I think it's really, really important. Thanks.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And I will be sure to recommend Aizome as well. Everyone go check out Aizome for wonderful plant-dyed bed sheets and bedding, the gold standard for your textiles. Thank you so much.